Welcome, everyone, to a very special live edition of Travel Trends. This is the very first Travel Trends on tour, and I'm surrounded by a very illustrious panel here at the Bellagio Hotel on the day before Virtuoso Week kicks off, joined by my good friend Gilad, who was, of course, with us for season one, and this will be an important episode to kick off the latest season. And we're actually switching up the format today. We're going to be a panel, and we're going to talk about the event that Gilad hosted today, the Travel Tech Conference, and we're going to talk about what we learned from the sessions and the startups. There was many incredible startups that came together today, so we're going to talk about what they're focusing on, what the highlights are, and what our big takeaways were. But let me first start by introducing you to Gilad himself, and then we're going to go around the room to give everyone a chance to give you an idea of who they are and what their background is.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back. Well, it's always fun to be here in Vegas. My name is Gilad. I'm a tech entrepreneur turned investor. I care a lot about artificial intelligence and trying to work on the connected trip.
Hi, Shane O'Flaherty. I'm from Microsoft on the industry team leading travel and hospitality and using really technology around the customer experience, employee experience, and operations in all of the travel enterprise companies.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Carlos Garcia from Trip Ventures. I am also an entrepreneur turned investor and always excited about the intersection of technology and travel.
I'm Stuart Greif. I'm Chief Strategy, Innovation, and Operating Officer for Forbes Travel Guide. I'm passionate about innovation in our industry, love the startup ecosystem and helping elevate. And I'm excited because I feel like we're at this rare opportunity to really redefine the industry. I was also told, Dan, that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas or maybe broadcast globally across the travel industry on your podcast.
Well, we're off to a great start so far. So I really appreciate you guys making time for this. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have now. I'm actually going to start off with Carlos. And the reason I'm going to start with Carlos is because each of these other gentlemen gave presentations earlier today. And I do want them to recap some of the key points that they had shared with the audiences. But I wanted to start with Carlos and get a sense from yourself how you thought today's session went. What stood out for you?
Well, definitely the word of the decade is going to be AI, right? So a lot of what we saw today was a lot of great companies that are building that new layer of tech for the travel and hospitality industry. And obviously Gilad made a great MC and host, and presenter, and same with Shane and, Stuart. So you'll hear directly from them. What stood out for me, during the day was really the quality of the startups that we had here today that are building true transformational technology for an industry that truly needs technology to propel itself forward.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, there was 20 startups, and then as you just heard from Carlos's background, we also have a Microsoft. Deloitte was there as well today. I've got a number of notes that I've made, but Gilad, maybe just if you wouldn't mind, for those people who are not familiar with the Travel Tech Summit, just give a little bit of context to how this event came about, how long you've been doing it, and how you organized this year's session.
Yeah, absolutely. I had this idea a few years ago of trying to have actually exactly what you said for this call, for this podcast, the idea of bringing together people who normally have conversations behind closed doors and being able to do that in a place where we include more people, more perspectives from different parts of our industry. So what we decided to do this year was, instead of having kind of one big chunk, we broke it into segments or to tracks where we brought different types of startups. And those were divided into demand side startups. So things focused on agencies and advisors and things like that. We had supply side startups focused on air, hotel, cruise, and tour. We had a track about sustainability tech. And then, of course, the last one was about artificial intelligence, which, as you all know, is something I care deeply about.
Definitely. And so after you spoke, you introduced Shane, and Shane took us through a number of really interesting slides from Microsoft. And there was clearly a lot of enthusiasm for Microsoft in the room, given that Virtuoso is a power user of Microsoft, myself as well, for many years. And so there is great interest in what Shane had to share, because already the room is completely gripped with what Microsoft is continuing to release, especially in regards to AI. Finishing emails was one of the examples that you'd given earlier today. So I'd love, if you wouldn't mind, just give everyone a brief overview of some of the topics you covered in your presentation that'll be most interesting to a wider audience.
Yeah, I think as the topic was connected journey and where we see the connected journey from a consumer going over time, and then how does generative AI essentially play into that. And this idea that as you move forward in time, we believe that ultimately the concept of a decentralized ID, that the consumer will own their own identity long term. And from that point, they will permission companies into their world and they'll share information with them that allows them to have a better experience. But how do we move from in travel? How do we create a more frictionless journey for the consumer? How do we move from a transactional relationship to more of an emotional relationship with that consumer? And then how does AI play into that? And really just also this concept, I mean, AI has been around since the 50s, but this concept of generative AI is something that's been a building block over time. It's just not something that was just invented and came out in January. It's been a building block over time. So encouraging the travel industry to use generative AI, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's DALL-E, whether it's Codex, to use those technologies. And we saw a lot in the startups, which was fascinating, to use this technology and embrace it to drive a better customer experience, a better employee experience, and really more operational efficiency across the board. So that was kind of the highlights overall.
Yeah, it was terrific. I mean, it certainly resonated with everyone I was sitting around in the audience. And one thing I was going to ask you, if it's possible, would be to share the presentation after this.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to.
Perfect. So what we'll do for those of you listening now, the power and magic of technology, we will make it available in the comments and the link so you can actually download that presentation, because I was busy snapping away. So I know I wanted a copy for myself, but I'm sure it'll be a great benefit to everyone else that's listening to this.
Absolutely.
Great. Now let's transition over to when Gilad was explaining that we broke into tracks after the main stage. And Stuart here from Forbes was actually one of the keynotes doing an excellent introduction to there was with the 4 tracks. One of them was AI and emerging technology, which of course everyone ran to, and Gilad of course took the keynote spot for that one, and those were some excellent sessions as well. But the session that you ran with, Stuart, was the agency and advisor technology, and I came to that one first because I wanted to see you speak, but also I was interested in the various startups, and the room was packed. So credit to you for rivaling the AI session that Gilad had organized, where you had a full house. So would you mind sharing a few of those insights you'd share with that group?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, Gilad deserves credit for stacking the deck in my favor as well and balancing it out by putting a slate of startups that are really doing innovative things around advisor technology, whether that's, how do you do reconciliations? How do you reinvent the operating system? A lot of things Gilad touched upon. For my keynote, what we wanted to do is talk about an area that's really relevant, not just to advisors and agencies, but really across the travel ecosystem. And it's more of a kind of macro trend when you think about social commerce. Let's talk about social first and then commerce. And then we can circle back and go into depth if folks choose, in the conversation. So first of all, social platforms are rising like never before. TikTok took 5 years to reach 1 billion monthly active users. It took Facebook about 9. And Threads, whether or not it's able to displace or compete with Twitter, put that aside for a second, it hit 100 million daily active users within 4 days. Right? That even bested ChatGPT, which took 2 months. It took Instagram 2.5 years and TikTok 9 months to hit that level. So people are inherently social. And what's really changed is this intersection of commerce, this desire to be able to transact. And you see it already in retail, where we used a poll quote from somebody that said something to the effect of, I see something in my Instagram feed that I really like, 3 clicks, and 2 days later, it's on my doorstep. And there are a number of startups across the ecosystem working on that on travel in terms of, how do you make travel bookable directly through posts? And it's not just the transactions, it's also the influencer economy. And one of the great reliefs is, and may this trend in this prediction come to pass, that it's not about the Kim Kardashians. May we no longer have to hear about the Kardashians. We're all looking for people whose curation and expertise we respect. And that might be somebody who has unique insights, let's say, to dim sum restaurants in the San Francisco Bay Area, or somebody that has really unique insights into, let's say, temples in Kyoto, Japan. And we also want our friends and family. And I think what's really interesting is 25 years ago with Google and the internet search era, what once was really innovative, the TripAdvisors, the Yelps, these types of search models, now I want to be able to know what people who I respect, including friends and families, and my personal social graph and these influencers, I want to be able to transact through them. And Gilad had a great company called Dharma that's enabling non-travel companies and individuals to create their own travel experiences. And I know, Dan, you may have had some background in there you can touch on as well. And so as we look forward, I think 10 years from now, right now, influencers are really kind of like decentralized media companies. They help you market your products and services. Well, when links become bookable, as they're increasingly happening in retail and travel, they become points of sales and distribution. And they're platforms today, the same way you look at doing an email campaign or Facebook, that are just going to be part of the MarTech stack. And we see all these platforms coming up. I can't tell you which one. We love Journey, Jerne, at Forbes Travel Guide, have a deep partnership for our hotels and other clients. So I think that's something everybody needs to be attenuated to and have a strategy in terms of how you're going to lever social. Because if you're not where your guests are going to discover travel, then you're not going to be relevant.
Yeah, well, one of the other examples you brought up in your presentation was Mr. Beast. And I definitely know Mr. Beast because my kids are completely obsessed with every video he puts out. And there's no question that his video will determine their travel behavior in the near future. He even put one out recently about yachts at 1 million, a 10 million, 50, 100 million. It's a fantastic bit of entertaining content. So Mr. Beast was one that you mentioned. But you were also really highlighting the fact that the travel inspiration is changing, as you were just mentioning, around TikTok. And Sharaf, who, of course, Dharma, we work closely with them, the acceleration team and myself. And it's great to see the success, the trajectory they're on. But as he pointed out, is that this generation, the influencers are going to be YouTubers.
That's right. And here's the some of the data stats for our audience, right? 77% per recent Expedia study of people are looking, right, to social media for inspiration when they're looking for tours, activities, experiences, and to book travel. It's 77%. And when you think about the degree to which folks are going to TikTok and looking at video content, even last year before ChatGPT came out, Google conceded inadvertently, a senior exec let it slip out, that 40% of young folks were looking, when they're looking where to eat lunch, they're not going to Google. They're not going to Google Maps. They're going to TikTok. They're going to Instagram. I asked my 10-year-old, he had a question about something. I said, well, why don't you Google it? Sorry, I didn't say ChatGPT, Shane, my bad. And he said, well, no, I'm just going to YouTube it. So, people are going to social, they're going to video, they're going to short form. And I truly believe that this is a seismic shift. It's not just younger folks. And Daniel Langer in the luxury world, who's very renowned and a professor, talks about if you're not at that point of cultural creation, right? The same reason that you used to have a contact center and a phone number, and why do I need a website? Why do I need an app? Why do I need to be on Facebook? Why does my travel company need to have an Instagram account? You need to be where your customers are going to be relevant. And they're going increasingly to the TikToks, to social platforms, and they're doing it in video increasingly, not just photos. Most of the growth on Instagram is through video and DMs.
Absolutely. There was some interesting stats shared on the number of photos that are taken per day and how that information, that data, there was a lot of talk on the AI session we'll come back to with some of those startups. But I wanted to bring Carlos back into the conversation because I'm really keen to know what track you sat through or which combination of tracks you sat through this morning. And if there was one or two startups that stood out to you. I'm very keen to share a couple that stood out to me, and I'd love for each of us to kind of call. There was 20. We can't unfortunately go through all of them, but which tracks did you go through, and which startups really spoke to you?
Well, I spent time in the Gilad's track AI, of course,
Yep.
and also Stuart's track, and those two were fascinating. I would say, just to echo, what Stuart was saying, that travel itself is inherently social, right? Like people elevate their profiles when they share social. And you mentioned how many pictures are shared. Every day, it's about 5 billion images that are shared on social media. A big portion of that is travel oriented, right? So it's no surprised, that now we are seeing the commercialization of, like all of that content, so obviously, like what Sharaf is doing with Dharma, like was one of the companies, that continuously seems to have a gravitational force for me, right? Because I truly believe in that travel being inherently social, and now it's time to, in a post SEO era, if you will, like SEO, it's going to be less relevant in booking travel. Where are we going to go to decide? And I think that influencers and is going to have a big a role to play in that area. Now, another startup, that, and I have to, we invested in them, so, like I am biased, so I have to disclose that. But one that is really interesting to me is Tango. So Tango, and the reason why they are so interesting to me is because, it's a real business and a business that is also very relevant to the Virtuoso audience, that was there in the room, and how they are basically using AI and, the traditional agency model, and basically building a more tech forward business. And if I can add another one is Legends,
Yes.
And going back to the amount of photos that are shared and, travel being inherently social, to close the loop, that, you don't have to go to social media to find that treasure trove of data. That treasure trove of data is in your phone, right? So I have 79,000 photos on my phone right now. So what they do is, they are able to basically go through all of the metadata of the photos, not the photos itself, right? But they're not doing computer vision on those photos, but they are doing geolocation analysis on all of those photos, and they are creating a traveler DNA. And to me, that was mind-blowing. I remember when I first met them, we are also investors in that company. I have to, again, disclose, sorry to be plugging the company that we invested in, but, when I first met them, I was, I really liked the founding team, and I thought that they could talk the talk, but I was wondering whether they could walk the walk, right? And a few weeks later, we see the first MVP very quickly, and we're like, okay, we know how hard it is to do this, and they're getting it done. So we think that company, even building that solution, that is so focused on building a traveler DNA, could be a cornerstone of the future of the industry as we go forward.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned Legends, and by all means, I'm glad you disclosed you had invested in those businesses. But what stood out to me with Legends was the concept and the presentation had real wow factor. Mm-hmm. And for me, of all the presentations I sat through today from the startups, it was the most powerful. Mm-hmm. So I think it's actually worth people listening to this to explore the concept they're looking to deliver on, because it's a big idea. The idea of having a company that you trust your data with, and to have this whole shift. I know Gilad and I have talked about this, Brian Chesky moving the entire business towards who you are and what you're interested in, as opposed to the where and when. And that really excites me about where it's happening. Gilad, I want to bring you back into this as well. From Carlos's examples, the three that he mentioned, all were part of your session, the AI session. Now, I realize you curated these startups, so you had a fairly good idea coming into it. What changed for you over the course of the session? Was there anyone like Legends, clearly for both of us, that really stood out and resonated with you? What was maybe different than you expected once they actually took the stage and you ran that session?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was really being blown away by the sustainability startups. I'm a new dad, so this is something I probably care about more now than maybe at other times. And there was some really incredible innovations there. And Corey, who presented from Impair, which is a company that provides hybrid engines and kits that essentially upgrade airplanes to be much more environmentally clean, told me that LAX, the airport, creates as much pollution as 80% of all the cars in the greater LA area. And I was like, that kind of blew my mind that it creates that much pollution. Because you think about, we all think about LA and the cars and the gridlock everywhere. So, I mean, that was something I really liked. Obviously, hydrogen airplanes, from Hydrogen Aero, that's a really exciting future. And they're really running actual routes and doing some interesting things. And then just one other ones I'll call out, Kind Traveler. It's essentially a club of people, of companies and hotels and businesses that come together and decide to give back to their communities. And a big chunk of the amount of money that that people pay to stay there and to enjoy their time on vacation goes to supporting charities in that actual community. And I think there's something really important about that direct connection between the two. So those are three, but I love them all, of course.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You went down the sustainability route. I'm glad you did, because there was one on that stage, Tuzmo, that I found really fascinating. The idea of connecting with local artisans.
Yeah.
And so, especially on the comeback from COVID.
Totally. And I think, when you think about sustainability, it's really important to think about the environment and the planet, but also about the cultures and the histories and the peoples of this planet. And supporting artisans is really a way of keeping alive traditions and craftsmanship that's come from generations. And I think that's almost as important in the sustainability side of things as making sure we have a planet to live in and air to breathe.
Absolutely. And I'm sure your son, when he eventually listens to this, will appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And how old is he now?
7 weeks.
7
weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to sleep like a baby tonight.
No doubt. Awesome. Shane, what sessions did you attend, and which? I mean, and I'd like a two-part to this.
Sure.
I'd love to know your Microsoft view and your personal view. The Microsoft view being, was there any of the startups that stood out to you as an executive and a leader in the technology space that you thought, wow, this is pretty interesting? And then personally, in terms of what you would actually use. Seeing some of these startups that you thought, wow, this is something that I didn't know existed, and now I don't want to live without. If you're going to start embracing, it.
I mean, Microsoft, of course, is huge in the sustainability space, and I work a lot in the airline space. And if you think of SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, it represents, less than 1% of all the fuel, and there's not enough out there on the planet. How do we produce more? And, and so really, I think both echoing Gilad's comment on Ampere and hydrogen, Aero, and what the progress that they're starting to make in the marketplace, I think that was huge, because I think there's a better way for us to pass on the next generation of air travel. I love just in general the way, these companies have embraced generative AI and all kind of the daisy chain of AI kind of platforms. That was amazing across the board. I like, in the contact center is probably the bigger area of generative AI where we're seeing some real changes and push in the marketplace. NLX is fantastic with this omni-channel kind of approach that they have to customer service. So I think that's a great one. I think generic. What was the company's name? Legends was phenomenal. Dharma. I mean, they're all fantastic. Point Me. I was going to look up for myself all the points I have around the world from traveling. How can I make some better decisions? Kind Traveler. I love the Artesian one. The Tuzmo was phenomenal because I was in traveling in Istanbul, and I remember going to the market. And I walked in this random place and bought something. And I said, I'm looking for something like this. And the guy's like, hey, I'll just walk you. So he walked me through this entire market. It was probably a 10-minute journey. And then he introduced me to another one of his artisan friends, and an amazing experience. So that idea of how that curation can take place in advance to experience at a local level, I think that's a phenomenal opportunity to get more from a localization perspective as you travel.
Yeah, that's great.
There's one more that I just had to mention, which is Resort Pass. Resort Pass is this really cool company that allows you to get like a day pass to a pool at a nice hotel or a cabana or a gym pass. And I do a fair amount of travel, and I go for board meetings. I often have this problem where I have these like 3 or 4 hours to kill. And I literally use Resort Pass before I ever met any of the guys on the team. And they were here today. So I would love to plug those guys, especially if you like hot tubbing as much as I do.
Hot tub guy. He's got the new nickname today.
Hot tub time machine.
So for me, one thing I want to say, Gilad mentioned about plugging a company. Carlos talks about, companies invested in, like, all of us probably, whether we are advisors, investors, or simply interested, love kind of all of the companies. And I think all 5 of us around this table, including you, Dan, we are passionate and get involved with the startup. So the conviction precedes any financial or personal investment. And our talking about them is because what we love about them and our passion in trying to help support and advocate all the companies, including some that we don't have time maybe necessarily today to touch on. For me, I'm involved in a number of these in different capacities, but I love Kind Traveler and the Give and Get because there is a direct impact to local charitable organizations, nonprofit, that hotels in this case, but others themselves, their employees support, and the guests get some benefit, and 100% of the money that the guests provide to that go to that cause. And they have these amazing reports where they can say, look, over the past 6 months, you've provided 2,635 meals for families in need, in terms of hunger or for the environment or climate. I love Tuzmo in the way it's connecting unique artisans around the world and providing economic support in ways that otherwise would be undiscovered with travelers, that allow them to have something really genuine of high craft and meaningful, and not necessarily just some kind of trinket that's been mass produced overseas, and creates a unique experience and connection to the artisan. Legends, I'm a huge fan of. Dharma, we've talked about. I'm going to tease Gilad, because I think Resort Pass is a ringer. Like, they're still a startup, but they're absolutely killing it. So if you're in the market, check them out. They're in 50 or more of our clients and growing rapidly. Two others that I'd point out. One is the Hostco. So I love, even as we're in hospitality and oftentimes hotels, in the kind of short-term rental space, if you wanted to have an amenity, if you wanted to provide massage therapists in the area, if you wanted to send flowers, if you wanted to provide even early and late checkout. So not all things that are physical, but even services. Or a good example that Annie, who's the founder and CEO, talked about, is like, if you're in this area where people are going for more kind of, let's say, health and well-being and getting in touch in an area, or if you're going to something like Burning Man, maybe you're looking for somebody that kind of has services that are more aligned to that. It'd be weird to have something that's like, talk to me about my chakras, like in New York City, versus in a place like maybe Sedona. And so I think they're really providing, I think, at scale, the ability for short-term rental owners and operators and management companies to provide hospitality services beyond the real estate and the basics, and to be able to do it at scale. And I love that. And there are a number of other companies in the ecosystem around that. I think there were a number of others like Origin. I just want to point out Traveler, TRVLR, that were in Kara Whitehills, who's an amazing go-to-market strategist and longtime angel investor and travel and thought leader in our industry globally. And some of the other ones that were in my session, we haven't really talked as much in depth. Trip Suite, Travel Wits, Turn, TERN, Hyperguest, Trey, as in 3, TRES Technologies. And I think there's probably one or two I've missed. I think Viva and Ampere, AMPAIRE, in sustainability. Point.me, which is cool in terms of being able to arbitrage points across everything you have in an amazing way and turn that into high value. And another company called Voyages. Check those companies out, play this back, and write those names down. They're all worth it. They wouldn't be here, Gilad wouldn't have curated them. The number of companies that didn't make it in versus the ones that did, all of these merit attention.
Anybody else want to pick up on that? Okay. You want to? Please.
So, one thing that I think is interesting to note, like out of all the companies that we saw, like today, is that as a common denominator, like a lot of these companies, and not just the companies, but the founders are mission-driven people. And you see it, of course, like in the sustainability, but every other company, you can see that they are not working just to make money, which obviously they have to as a company, but like it's also the why. Why are they building this company, and why they want to transform the industry? One that stood out to me was Traveler. And of course, like getting commissions faster to travel advisors is key for the industry to continue to grow. And I think that they are a mission-driven company that I would like to see them succeed. And be able to scale. And we're not an investor in the company.
Will you be?
Well, there was quite a broad range, as clearly everyone has highlighted here. And the one thing that Stuart pointed out is Resort Pass. There are different stages. Some of them are pre-seed, seed. You mentioned Hype Beast, Hype Traveler.
Hyperguest?
Hyperguest, okay, I get that wrong. one of the ones you mentioned was Hyperguest, and we actually had a chance to see them at dinner last night that organized, and they have just raised a Series A, and their business is booming. They've got 37,000 hotels on their platform. Yeah. And I went to go see his talk today, and he's a very confident entrepreneur, to give him full credit. He's exited 3 businesses, and he's got great investors backing him now, and he's got a very successful, scalable business. And so it was great to see the different stages these startups are. And so I want to throw it back to Gilad. And in terms of that curation of how you kind of brought those individuals together, we talked about the tracks, but they're all at different stages. Was that also a factor in your decision making of the groups that you brought together?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way I think about the event from the macro perspective is, we started off with a talk where I give every year talking about 5 themes and trends that I focus on in travel technology. And then I try to explore those from a bunch of different perspectives. So if I give a bit of an academic version of that, then I try to have some large corporate innovators, some analysts or investors' perspective, and then, of course, startups at different stages. So that was definitely by design. And exactly as Stuart pointed out, we got to see some more mature startups and what they're working on, and then some really early stage, especially in the AI track, of companies that are just, a couple months old.
Yeah, that's a good point you just made, because there were a couple presentations that were very brief. Let's say so. I don't want to be harsh by saying underwhelming, but there was certainly a few presentations that you were expecting more, but it was clear it's just early. They've got a nugget of an idea, and they may be coming back to us next year or 6 months from now, and all of a sudden they've really blossomed into something. And
totally. And just to pitch, the Virtuoso Tech Partner Program, a number of the companies who presented last year in the program, including Lucia and Sion and others, have now become tech partners of Virtuoso and use their membership in the network to be able to access hundreds of agencies and all the other partners. So it's exactly what you're talking about: people who start early and then are able to mature with feedback.
One of the things I love and really respect and admire about everybody at this table, and it's reflected in Gilad, I think last year as well as this year, is, the audience for Virtuoso Week, you've got a mix of, right, you've got advisors, agencies, there's hotels, there are GMs and sales folks, you have suppliers, you have tech folks in the industry. And I think you and Matthew Upchurch, the CEO of Virtuoso, talk about this. You're not just inviting in things that are biasing towards just the subset. In fact, I think last year you had one of the leaders from Expedia in here. There are people in innovations that may even threaten or be competing in some ways. And to the credits of those companies and the credit of you, that the opportunity to learn even from competitors and have, spirited conversations, and to the credit of your audience too, pushing back in respectful ways with hard questions, including to the startups today, which handled it with aplomb. And folks are saying, well, I don't understand why I would use you instead of a GDS, for example. I'm not going to name the company. And so it's not a listen, absorb. It's really this dynamic of people in the audience. And you set the table with this of actually engaging in conversation, not being presented to, and also not just putting, hey, here's a subset that, we know people are already using here, things that may even, still be 6 months or, to your point, Dan, different stages. So I love that about this program. And I love the fact that it's not just, companies that are, friendly, quote unquote. It's innovation in ways that people need to be aware of, maybe competing with, maybe something that's a threat, or maybe something that's even outside their domain but helps them learn and evolve their own business.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I ever spoke at a Virtuoso event, it was Symposium in Berlin a decade ago. And I had a startup called UTrip, and half the people in the room thought that we were there to take him out of business. And, that is one of Matthew's unique abilities, is being able to bring people in who really push. And of course, what I shared with them a decade ago is I still think true today, which is technology can be your competition or technology can be your superpower. Just depends what you do with it.
One other topic I want to go back to before we actually broke out into the startup sessions was a presentation that was given by a lady named Caroline Corsa, who came from Deloitte. And she was one of the people when Gilad had listed the participants, that you had someone from Microsoft and from Deloitte, and you had some high profile executives, and then also these terrific startups. But one of the presentations that she gave at the beginning really stood out to me. At first, I must say that when she started her presentation, because I've never met Carolyn before, she was an excellent presenter, but when she first started giving her talk, she was highlighting a research report that Deloitte had done that took years and dozens of people and cost millions of dollars. And as soon as she said all those things, I thought, well, how good can this really be? Because they had to talk about 10 years into the future when it's so difficult to predict what's going to happen 6 months or 12 months from now. So when she gave the context, initially I was slightly hesitant. And then when she started getting into the detail, I was really impressed. And I am going to share a link to this at the end of the talk as well, so you guys can check it out. But I just wanted to share with you the 6 forces that they had highlighted that's shaping the consumer industry. This is their prediction for the next 10 years. I just want to call out a couple of them because they couldn't be more relevant to the startups. And I think that's where, for me, you start to see the stars are aligning when, one of the themes, of course, is the changing consumer, and all the impacts that are adjusting consumer behavior. There is extreme climate change, of course. That's another powerful and important force that's shaping our industry, which is why we're all talking about sustainability. The evolving society and culture, about consumers breaking free of certain traditional anchors, that came up repeatedly, and that's a big focus with the social commerce and creator-led economy and all of those elements. And that there is radical industry upheaval was another theme. And so those, for me, were some really interesting takeaways after listening to her talk, sharing that report, and then seeing how some of these startups are navigating this new world and the ones that are clearly onto something. And so, Shane, I want to bring you back into this, if that's okay, and get your take on when the day started. So going back to the beginning, and I want to bring Gillett back into this as well, because obviously you gave such a great introduction. What are some of the other broader themes? So taking a step back from some of those startups that you see that are shaping travel, because you are not only a Microsoft executive, but you're specifically focused on travel and hospitality. This is your space, right? You have a deep domain expertise here. So I'd love to hear from you with some of the other overall trends, since obviously that's the name of this podcast.
Yeah,
and get your insights.
Yeah, I think number the biggest one is we're finally seeing investment from travel companies in getting off the legacy systems. So platforms that they've had around for the last 30 and 40 years, which is kind of shocking. But they're starting to reinvent themselves. And I think alignment also with business and IT have all come together really to drive, because of the challenges of the COVID period, really driving innovation in the space that we've not seen before in a very, very long time. So I think that's been a catalyst for change and investment in the space. And that's number one. That's a broad theme. We're starting to see companies now invest more. That labor is a huge challenge in travel. So, so now their employees are saying, hey, you've invested all this money in consumer-based technology, please invest in me. And we've done a lot of research associated with that. So investment in employee technology, so they can come into work and feel like they're not going back in time. So that's a big investment we're seeing in the space. And then, all the trends that Carolyn highlighted were all very accurate. Yeah. And then this concept of digitally engaging this younger generation of consumers. I think this, we've been very focused historically on the human-to-human experience, but this younger Gen Z wants digital engagement at the same level and experience as they have human-to-human experiences, and they need that, they want that, and how does the industry as a whole help drive these kind of connection points with them in a digital way, which doesn't really exist as very much beyond kind of a transaction side today.
Absolutely. No, it's very interesting, and I think that's where I want to make sure I get all of your insights now. We'll shift onto this topic, and then I'm going to give you guys the last word as well to wrap up this fascinating podcast and discussion. I want to go back to Carlos, because you are an investor not only in some of the startups we've seen here, but you specialize in travel as well. So Shane specializes in travel. Your business, Trip Ventures, you've really focused on the travel industry. What are some of the other main themes? Like for you, obviously, you're looking at some of these startups, you're aware of the trends, and you're trying to see which ones are best positioned to capitalize on them. So what are some of the other trends that you're seeing across the investments that you're making?
Well, one that is top of mind for me and that I think complements the ones that Carolyn shared, like in her amazing presentation, is that millennials are outspending boomers in luxury travel. And that to me is like one of the trends that I can see as an investment theme, right? Like, okay, how do we digitize, like the experience? And to Shane's point, like human to human is what we all want as well. But, like if you are a millennial, like, or younger, like you also want the digital component, and sometimes when I talk to my friends at the Forbes Travel Guide, we often say that technology is luxury. Technology, when you think of access to technology, being able to come into this room and open the shades, in a modern way, from your phone and things like that, those things are access to technology that I see as a trend going forward.
Can I just add one shout out to Aria next door over here? They have the coolest alarm clock. You can tell it within the window of time you want it to wake up, and it will slowly open the blinds in your room between the window of time you set for it. It's a quite cool little feature.
One of the things I'm going to ask these gentlemen at the end is the big takeaway from today. And my big takeaway already is that Gilad has by far the nicest room. And and what he just described doesn't exist in my room. So that's clearly I was actually really impressed with the digital key. The whole idea of the seamless customer journey. I remember Sam Shank just from Hotel Tonight, but before they were acquired by Airbnb, and it was at a Focusrite conference, and Sam Shank, after his amazing presentation, was meeting with Dara when he ran Expedia. And when I saw that conversation happening, I thought, for sure, Expedia is going to acquire them. That was definitely leading in that direction. And then Airbnb swooped in. But Sam Shank gave this presentation to talk about the future of the traveler experience that would also know information, including the temperature of the room that you prefer. So it would have all this information about you, which is some of the things that Legends was really touching on as well today, is all these things that are unique to you. I mean, you may love that feature that may help you wake up in the morning. So how do you take that information and for me, I always try and make sure if there's a technology available, I will try and take advantage of it so that I can learn, because obviously sometimes it doesn't work as well as expected. But the digital key is a really impressive MGM development that is completely seamless. I checked in on the plane, and when I got to the hotel, my room was ready. And I got the notification, and I went right to my room, and it was remarkable. And I'm using it as my key for access. The only thing I need to do is make sure my phone is charged. That's the only risk you run into. You don't have a key.
Pretty much no latency, which is also key. A lot of the other ones in the market, have forward leaning, have lags, or don't work by the time you get in the elevator. Like the elevator door is closed before you can even get. Theirs is fast and works every time. Yeah.
So Stuart, let's go back to you now. We've with Shane's vantage point and Carlos's vantage point, you come into this. You are a veteran in this industry. I've known each other for many years. You've had significant corporate roles in a number of different organizations, and now, of course, you're with Forbes Travel Guide. From your role there at Forbes, what were some of the things that you're seeing already coming into this that you were kind of looking for with trends in our space?
Yeah, I think there's, first of all, I think if we step back, there's been a fundamental shift globally post-pandemic. And I think it is, everybody had a moment to step back from their lives, professionally, personally, and be able to think about and recalibrate. And whether it was conscious or unconscious, or the notion of our own mortality or our freedom to travel about when we want, I believe that everybody kind of realized that, what they really want to do is have more opportunity to self-actualize, to connect with something that is meaningful down to your soul, for lack of a better term, right? And that's not just, in the big picture, but in our daily lives, whether it's personal or professional, to seek to have these moments of things that fulfill us on a deeper, more meaningful level. And I think, some of the themes we touched on, the growth in experiences, people wanting to travel, that bodes well for our industry globally, right? You see the younger generations, and it's been talked about, who are seeking experiences over things. Well, the boomers, which isn't talked about as much, are retiring with the greatest wealth transfer. And what are they going to do? Buy a fifth car? No, they're going to travel. They're going to spend money in restaurants, experiences. And guess what? They're probably going to bring their kids and grandkids along as well. I also think there's been this huge shift. Even before the pandemic, you had wellness where it was far beyond a yoga mat. We were starting to get into science-based, sleep technology, the example Gilad said, or lighting, circadian rhythms. Well, since then, we're already extending into things like longevity. But I think this notion of well-being imbued in everything that we do, how can I continue a healthier lifestyle and have elements of that throughout my experience? And I'm not saying that in Vegas, of all places, people aren't going to indulge. But sustainability is also one of these where I really do think as, in the industry, people want it, but they need help providing it. And they also understand that, let's say in aviation, there's going to be bigger shifts for things like sustainable aviation fuel, for example. And no one company or airline can do that. But what is it that you're doing to do your best within reason to make your offerings and your services more sustainable and show that you're trying and moving in direction, and you'll get credit for that. And woe's to you if you don't, because especially the younger generations will disproportionately punish you for it. Ultimately, I think the ultimate luxury is now kind of how people are in their daily lives seeking that kind of joy and that fulfillment. And I think that is something that imbues, and travel is like no other industry, maybe entertainment a little bit, but travel is something that really is at the core of all of these. And I'm excited for everybody in the industry, because I think the other overlap is we're at a point where the cost of technology, where things like AP as a product, middleware, the ability to go outside the legacy systems, has opened up, and ChatGPT as an example with AI, that the next 10 years, this is the most opportune time to be building, even if ironically the funding environment is challenging, in ways that maybe for the last 10 or 20 years haven't been possible. And I think that's why we all see this opportunity with these startups to drive change in an industry in a disproportionate way. I'm excited for it every day, Dan.
Yeah, definitely. That showed today in your presentation and the conversation that we're having now, that we're all animated for what's coming next. It's clearly, we're all intellectually curious. We wouldn't be having this conversation otherwise. And we all have different vantage points and different perspectives. And that's obviously the focus of this podcast and these discussions, is to tell people stories and also be able to share insights that will be beneficial to other people. To kind of close off, if you will, I'm going to give you guys each a chance to give your big highlight, but I'm going to throw it back to Gilad, because each of us here in this room, because it's wonderful to be back together in person and not wearing masks. We're all, we're not social distancing at all. We don't need to be.
Shane asked me to put one over my face, in fairness. and he was right. He was right.
And here we are at a Virtuoso event with 5,000 people from 105 countries, as Matthew Upchurch reminded us as the conference started. And the total revenue for Virtuoso agents is around $28 billion. It's a massive spend. And so it highlights that the industry is back. And one of the other elements I just wanted to highlight about the conference and what's unique about the sessions today was that it's still very focused on the travel trade. And that, to me, is an important reminder that, I started my career 20 years ago in corporate travel management, and spent a lot of time building booking systems that were designed for travel agents to be able to, to automate or assist with their work. And there was always a fear then that technology was going to replace their role. And of course, today Gilad had to address that front and center with one of his slides saying, will AI replace the travel agent? And the answer is no, but you will have an AI assistant. And so one of the things that certainly came up in the sessions, and I gave Sharaf some feedback before his presentation on Dharma about what's in it for the travel agent. And sure enough, one of the ladies in the question said, how does this, she put her hand up and said, how is this relevant for me as a trip advisor, a travel advisor? And he did a great job answering the question. But the people in the room were asking questions of the startups about data security, their IP. You're a startup. Are you going to be around? There's that fear and concern that some of these new technology companies may disappear, and that these are large established travel agencies in many cases that often are laggards. And that's not a disrespectful term in this instance, because they're legacy businesses that have had proven success over an extended period of time and that have navigated many changes. And so I just wanted to give everyone that context as we sit here preparing for the first official day of Virtuoso, and the importance of the session that Gilad hosted. I mean, Gilad, you sit on the board with Virtuoso. You're close with Matthew Upchurch. You've had the privilege of organizing this now for a few years. And all of us have a desire to connect the ecosystem of startups with big corporate. And so going back to where the day started and how this call came together, Gilad, are there a few other things you'd like to be able to share with us, or even maybe talk about where you think we go from here? Because I'm sure in your mind, you're already thinking about next year.
Oh, well, I'm definitely already thinking about next year. No, but I mean, I'd conclude by really highlighting, kind of, I think, the three macro themes that I'm looking at, both from an investor perspective, but also as someone who's just interested and cares about the industry. The idea of, more connected technology. So starting with the operating system, and, Stuart mentioned some of those that were with us today. And then going from that to the connected trip, which I see as the holy grail. So, when people ask me about the upside, the promise of AI in our industry, it's a trip that's actually connected, where they know they want the humidifier and the chocolate bar in the room, where my AI talks to their AI. So anyways, the connected trip, which Shane spoke about. The other is new monetization channel. So I think there's a lot of interesting things happening on business model innovation with and without technology. So I'm really excited about both new agency models, and Tango was one example we spoke about earlier today. But there's also a lot of programs like Safara, which is kind of like a Amazon Prime model for travel, and lots of other models there. Brands monetizing their audience through travel, non-travel brands doing that. So, Dharma was a great example of how, TV shows and winemakers and others are doing that. But we've seen a lot of other examples. And the last is financialization of travel, which is still going strong. And then, of course, lastly is commoditization of AI. And, that's really my main thing that I think about the AI chapter we're in right now, is that very soon it's going to be accessible to businesses that never had access to advanced technology before. And I think that's a really exciting thing. So those are a few things I'm watching.
Definitely. Thanks, Gilad. And thanks for putting this on. But let's get everyone else's kind of big takeaway, big insight, or area of focus.
Well, I mean, as Stuart highlighted, post COVID, it's everyone has a more purpose-driven life. And then how do you layer that into purpose-driven travel? And then when you say purpose-driven travel, you want a more curated trip. You recognize you have a little amount of time. So how can the travel agency, travel advisor network use technology to provide better insight for that consumer, if they have better knowledge on that consumer, to drive a better experience for them, and and use their time wisely when they're in market to find the right crafts, attractions wherever they're going. So it's really how do you provide a more hyper-personalized service? And I think, as we talked earlier today, I mean, humans have had to adapt to technology for a long period of time, and now we've hit that inflection point where technology has adapted to humans. So now we have, and Gilad talks about superpowers, we now have a superpower. We have a co-pilot who will be working with us, both on the employee side and the consumer side, trying to drive a better experience for us long term. So it's super exciting. You could feel the energy in the room and feel the energy in this discussion today, that we're always trying to push the industry as far as we can, to accept technology, to accept changes, and really to grow. And as we grow, everyone wins. It's kind of this virtuous circle.
Thank you, Shane. Really interesting points there. Carlos, how about yourself?
For me, the takeaway is that, as you pointed out, some of the companies that we saw, are not going to make it through, right? Are not going to, but, they are all contributing towards that vision of the connected trip, and I think that long term is many short terms. And what I am seeing now is an acceleration of, things that we were all hoping for the last couple of decades, right? And all of a sudden it's here, and we talk about generative AI, the commoditization of AI, which I personally believe is where we are today, right? But that is all paving the road for a much brighter future for the travel industry and for humanity. I think that, going back to being purpose-driven and traveling with more purpose and being more intentional about your travels, I think that all of this technology is going to augment our travel experiences as we go forward.
That's great. Thank you, Carlos. And Stuart, over to you. And I'm just going to make one point, just as you kindly addressed before we started to record, is that we are 5 gentlemen having this conversation. There was actually supposed to be a female executive, Kara, that was going to join us. And actually tomorrow, 2 of the 3 people that will be joining our podcast will be female leaders in our industry. And many of the startups we talked about today were, and Legends being a good example, were female leaders in this space. And this is an industry that when you look around Virtuoso is very female-led, and some really terrific executives. And so I just wanted to point that out. So we're remiss not to have one of them joining us right at this moment, but we all have a great respect for their contribution as well. And on that note, and I just wanted Stuart was the one that brought that to our collective attention as we started this conversation.
And I appreciate it in recognition of everybody around the table we talked about it. We tried to actually also incorporate one or two other female executives whose schedules just had conflicts. And the funny thing is, before you brought that up on the call, I wanted to first, and then I'll have a wrap comment, recognize Carolyn Corda from Deloitte, who you talked about earlier. Carolyn is a rock star in the industry, just as Kara is in kind of the angel and go-to-market. And Kara's been in our industry, if you look at her LinkedIn and her background, seminal travel tech companies, and was the chief commercial officer in her own right. Carolyn Corda was the chief commercial officer and chief marketing officer for Adara, which was the largest data co-op in the travel industry. Marriott and other big brands participated. She was twice a partner and chief digital officer for the travel and hospitality practice at Accenture. She was an executive at FICO, the credit scoring. She was at Epsilon, among many other companies. And you talk about somebody who's quietly, oftentimes in ways not in the spotlight, driving change meaningfully, and somebody that's a tremendous digital expert in e-commerce data, et cetera. So I know we would have loved to have her here. And if you get a chance, I'd encourage
Definitely
seeing if you could do a follow-up. So for me, the closing comment, I think, my big takeaway is to circle back to something that, a quote from Matthew Upchurch, which he shared at the Forbes Travel Guide event earlier this year. And I know his partnership with Gilad and what that has done to transform together, as well as the team at Virtuoso, has been one of these incredible partnerships. And Matthew's quote is that, when it comes to technology, you, quote, automate the predictable to humanize the exceptional. And the notion is, and I love the way Gilad put this across in a follow-up on the stage today, where he talked about, when it comes to AI or any technology, the short definition is this is a tool to help humans do their job better. And so I really think oftentimes technology is viewed with fear or as something that's threatening, as opposed to how does this free me up from the administrative, from the time-consuming tasks in order to focus on the higher value add and our customers. And I have no doubt that Gilad also probably had no small part in his conversations with Matthew, and Matthew developing that point of view that I know they both share. So I can't think of a better way to wrap this up at Virtuoso than quoting Matthew and referencing his and Gilad's perspective on technology that I know we all share.
That's perfect. And I won't look at Gilad to see if he actually wrote that in the background, and but maybe had a hand in it somehow. But it's interesting you mentioned that. That's a great way to close off, because so many startups mention that today. And and people that work at Virtuoso, that mission, that is clear to them, and it's powerful. Fiona was on the podcast season 1 after Gilad. She'd seen Gilad speak, and she had shared that quote as well. So it's meaningful, it resonates, and I'm sure we'll hear more of that over the next few days. Well, gentlemen, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you for making the time. Thanks for all your contributions today, and we're looking forward to meetings in the next few days. And please be sure to check everyone out here. They're all thought leaders, so be sure to check out their LinkedIns and follow up as beneficial, and we'll share some of these presentations. And we look forward to doing more of these travel trends on tour in the future. So thanks for making the time to listen to us. Hope you really benefited from it, and we'll see you on the next episode of Travel Trends. Thanks so much.